Welcome to the PlaceOS podcast, the regular series where Steve and I talk about AI. The topic this week is open source AI, and open source is a big part of our culture at PlaceOS. The OS in our brand name doesn't necessarily stand for open source, but it could. It could be operating system of the building, open source, open standards, all of the things we support and advocate. So we're very interested in open source AI. It's interesting when you look even at OpenAI, where their naming is similar to our branding, right? Like their name, the open part was meant to reference open source, but it's not open source, right?
Yeah. I mean, they do open source a lot of models, so like Whisper and things that are very useful.
Yeah.
But they're not open sourcing their bigger models just because, I mean, for them, it's not only that competitors will then have access to it, which I guess is a big part of it for someone like Microsoft.
Yeah.
But also the models are just so insanely big that you and I would never be able to run them. We'd need to make $100,000 investment just to get close, I think, to running an OpenAI.
So you can't just fork a Git repository and download that and compile that and test it on your laptop or something.
Yeah, exactly.
You have to have a server farm in the desert.
Yeah.
And that's how if you look at some of the email chains that they've made public through some of the legal proceedings of the founding story of OpenAI, and you see that they're like, that's our secret sauce. Like, we need lots of money so we can run these big models.
Yeah. And I mean, there's other models. So like, I guess sort of the catalyst for this conversation today is the new Facebook LLAMA model.
Yeah.
And Facebook actually talked a little bit about how much it costs to build the model and then why they're making it available. But with OpenAI, it's just impossible for them. Like, if they shared it would make no difference to the everyday person.
Yeah.
Like billions of dollars spent making that AI model, and Microsoft's the investor, so they want to capitalize on that investment,
including like in-kind contribution for server architecture and compute power, right? Like, it's not just it's an interesting, if you look at their deal structure with Microsoft, it's not just a bunch of cash. Like a lot of strategic investments it's actually like, well, getting access to our infrastructure.
Yeah. And it's interesting how long that deal would have been in the pipeline, because Microsoft would have had to scale up their data centers, which sort of gives Microsoft a bit of a lead over other competitors.
Yeah.
And you saw the sort of NVIDIA stock price going crazy when Facebook decided they're going to get right into AI and then purchased billions of dollars worth of graphics cards, or AI accelerators.
Yeah.
And which is just insane that all of that money is being spent. And then Facebook, for instance, is giving everyday people access to what they've generated.
Yeah. So like, to date, all of these models required raw power. Some of these new models that are being open sourced, can we run them? Is it in the near future the compute power or these models are more efficient, plus compute power gets better because of innovations in chips? Is like, when's this magic sort of convergence going to happen?
Yeah. I mean, it's a bit of both. So the chips are getting faster and designed to accelerate those models. So someone like Apple their next phone will most likely have an AI chip in it and be able to process a reasonably large model quite quickly on your phone.
Yeah. So it's not like going back to the cloud. A lot of it can happen on the device itself.
I'd say you definitely have a much better Siri running on the device itself versus the current version of Siri, which goes to the cloud and is more traditional AI running it versus a modern LLM. But the LLAMA model, there is a cut down version. So effectively what they do is they reduce the accuracy of the model. So the neural network that makes up the model is like big floating point numbers. And then to make that fit onto a regular size computer, you can convert them into 8-bit integers and just say, instead of between 0 and 1 as a float, you've now got between 0 and 255.
Yep.
And then the version of Llama that will run on your laptop, maybe if you have 8 gigs of graphics memory, so it's more like a gaming laptop. They cut it down even further to 4-bit numbers.
Yeah.
So it loses a lot of accuracy when you go from a floating point, which is 32-bit or 64-bit, down to 4-bit per neuron.
But it still might have some practical applications.
Oh, it's still extremely smart. I would say it's probably like ChatGPT 3.5 level.
Yeah.
At 4-bit. And that's pretty insane.
Which can potentially run locally. I mean, not on a powerful PC still, but not on a mobile device. But yeah, then the chips get better and dedicated chips for AI. That's interesting because we've always had dedicated chips for graphics and now we're just adding more processing for dedicated actions.
Yeah, and I assume the way they'll design these chips is the actual AI is either like flashed to the chip, so it doesn't have to. It's not using memory effectively. It's the AI itself is the chip, and the inputs get loaded in or whatever, and it just runs through the chip. Although I'd noticed that Apple released a paper on splitting up LLMs, so I assume their chip can't actually hold the full neural network in at once.
Yeah,
but loads it in segments.
Okay.
To process some information.
Yeah. Yeah, so like designing architecture to with the limitations of the hardware, so solving that with the processors. So is the future that there is going to be a lot of open source models available to developers? Like we can just have our own models running on our own hardware, let's say in 5-10 years?
Grab them off a shelf. I mean, we basically already got that now.
Yeah.
And the other thing, I guess, with these open models, so something like Facebook's model, they've given us the weights and they've given us the model itself, but they haven't given us the training data. So it's sort of semi-open.
So you'd have to start from scratch and train your own data without the resources of Facebook.
But that's exactly. And the expensive bit is the training bit.
Yeah.
But Facebook actually said that with their models, they're trying to design them to not require as much powerful hardware. And to put it in comparison, their largest version of Llama 3, I think, is a bit bigger than 1/4 of ChatGPT's models.
Okay.
So ChatGPT itself is actually split into 4 different neural networks.
Yeah.
And I think based on what it's being asked, it directs your query to one of those 4, or runs on all 4. I'm not actually sure. But they've actually got 4 specialty LLMs, and whereas Llama is just 1, competing against 4 much bigger ones effectively.
Does Facebook have a competitive advantage open sourcing their project?
So the way Zuckerberg described it...
Didn't initiate because it was leaked?
Yeah, it was leaked by a university. So they were sharing it with unis because they want to get unis interested.
Okay.
But then I think when it leaked and everyone came up with these cool ideas on how to use it, and I think someone made it more efficient, managed to get it running on local computers and things like that. So instead of buying a 40K computer, which I think 2 required, someone worked out how to run it on a laptop, just on a CPU, and then people got the GPUs working, and
that is a benefit to open source.
Yeah, exactly.
That we benefit from that at PlaceOS with our open source elements, where all these developers contribute because they use it for their own interesting projects, and then we get that back and can use it commercially.
Yeah, and so they've sort of licensed it in a similar way to that we have, where we've said, effectively, don't compete with us. Yeah, and it's open source.
Yeah.
And they've done the same thing. So don't build a social network with our model, and you're free to use it for whatever you want. But it also means they can, say, purchase a company if they're doing something interesting. Yeah. And it's already using their tooling.
Yeah, and they already have access to that code, so they're just bringing the resources in. So it's an interesting strategy, maybe somewhat accidental because it leaked anyway, and then they put some open source licensing around it and process. But maybe that was their intention from the beginning. Who knows? What does this mean to the incumbents like OpenAI that had this huge sort of head start in the market?
So I think OpenAI will still maintain their lead. I mean, so OpenAI's goal is artificial general intelligence, so just an omnipotent AI being that knows everything. And
there's some speculation that they might be there already. They just haven't released it to the world.
Or it's too expensive to run, or I mean, I'm sure they're not making money on it yet. I'm sure it's all quite a little bit of a loss leader, just waiting for hardware to catch up or whatnot. But if you have the lead in the market, then you'll make the money eventually. And I think Facebook has the same stated goal, but because of their platforms, they've got a lot of use cases internally that can be really useful, having AI doing something that humans might have already done, like content moderation. So they're trying to make their AI useful for their current workplace. I mean, you've seen all these large tech companies firing thousands of people. These are the people they're probably firing. It's the content moderation team, because the AI now does that. And the AI is possibly better or less biased, or, it's not going to miss as much. But the advantage of them using it for this like high intensity system, like there's a lot of data coming in that's got to be moderated. They're trying to make their AI as efficient as possible, which benefits the everyday person. If you want to load that model and use it locally.
It's sort of scary to think of, like, let's say there is a conscious AI, true intelligent AI that comes out of Facebook, and it's been trained on the worst parts of the human condition. So, but they do, that is their advantage, right? They have so many users already. They have so much data they can use for training.
Yeah, exactly. And they know what's bad, because they've had all these humans flagging things as bad for so many years. And you could train that AI to really hate that stuff and love everything else. So really,
but there's a history there of like their algorithms getting away from them. There's a lot of like internal whistleblowers that sort of come out saying, we don't know how this works anymore, and it's sort of, we can't control it because of that reason. And this could be a similar case, but with more power, because it's something that can action, not just deliver us content, but do more than that.
They actually mentioned, and I feel like OpenAI has mentioned this as well, is that the older models are used to help train the newer models. Similar to how a teacher would train a student, or someone trained Einstein, but then Einstein became better than the teacher. They're doing the same thing with AI. So now AI, 30%, 50% of training is actually done by the previous generation of the AI.
Which makes sense, but again, when you think about this in context of that company and science fiction, machines building machines, it's basically Skynet, right? But
100%. It's sort of getting that level. I mean, the amount of energy. So Zuckerberg actually said that if he had unlimited money, he'd be investing in energy. So like literally, they just can't get enough power to install the GPUs into the data centers.
Yeah, it's like the fundamental technology driving all of this, right? It's we take it for granted because it's such a utility, and it's almost invisible to us as consumers, the electricity, the energy.
And the lead time's so long. So it's like, it takes 10 years to build a nuclear power plant, or at least a few years to build a lesser power plant. But they all need the power now. So there's... So potentially, ChatGPT 5 or whatever OpenAI's got cooking, they can't release it because they just can't power it. Or they can't train it because they've got all these limitations with the amount of energy.
This could be the other breakthrough, like a lot of big technology achievements happen all of a sudden with breakthroughs. And if there's an energy breakthrough with like a really good source of energy that like nuclear power, that's easier to build, faster to build, fusion, whatever it is.
I assume the investment in a lot of energy generation projects that have been underinvested in. So I can't remember what they were called, but where you use the waste of nuclear power plants as a new energy generation. But no one's built one yet. Maybe there's one in China. but I'm sure the investment will
This-
start coming in.
This is what Australia should be doing, right? Like
Mm.
we have the vacant land.
Yeah,
Like
data centers everywhere.
we have
Solar.
Yeah, we have the
powering it
sun,
all.
we have the outback.
Mm.
We should have half the outback just as a data center with renewable energies powering it.
Yeah.
And breakthroughs in energy powering it.
And I guess it could encourage breakthroughs the other way. So that limitations often mean people will strive to work around these limitations.
Yeah.
So if AI is going to not require as much power and compute, having this limitation on how much power and hence how much compute you have
Yes.
might actually increase the innovation in just the AI space, because now suddenly everyone's got to break these neural networks down,
Yes.
either split them up or make them smaller.
Yeah, the limitations create more innovation
Mm.
in the models. They get more efficient and smarter and could perhaps work out how we do energy better.
Yeah.
So it could be
solve
like,
the problems
Yeah.
that they have.
I could be much smarter if I had more energy, and here's how you can give me more energy.
Mm.
And it's interesting what's going to happen, because it's already happening so rapidly, right? Like
Yeah.
in some ways, like it's like all technology. In some ways, it feels slow, and you want it to move faster.
Mm.
But then when you zoom out like a few years, you're like, oh yeah, there's a lot has happened in 3 years.
Yeah.
Imagine what 6 years is going to bring us.
Yeah. And one of those interesting things is, like, it all leans on Taiwan at the moment.
Mm.
Like every single chip doing this AI for all those companies is produced there.
Yeah.
And the US government isn't letting China have them.
Yeah.
And China already wants Taiwan.
Yeah, it's adding to the tensions.
The tensions in the world, yeah.
Yeah. We don't need to get into that as an AI podcast, but
It's just,
we'll discuss that more over beer before our political views seep in.
well, it's not even political. It's just like an insane tension that's been
100%.
created.
And it's local to us in Australia.
Mm.
So we are probably more aware of this than other parts of the world, because it's more that it's regional and it's in our news constantly.
Yeah.
Cool. Thanks, Steve.
Thanks, John.